The British royal household has weathered scandals, abdications, betrayals, and grief, but nothing could have prepared it for the silence that descended without warning. The kind of silence that does not announce itself with bells or black ties, but instead creeps through corridors and settles into the bones. It began not with a declaration but with absence. In the early hours of the morning, as newsrooms across London refreshed their feeds and palace correspondents waited for routine confirmations, a single line appeared and then spread like a fissure through marble. Prince William had cancelled all upcoming engagements. No explanation, no clarification, no substitute appearances, just cancellation after cancellation stacked like fallen dominoes. Within minutes, royal watchers braced for impact, because in the monarchy, silence is never empty. It is deliberate, it is defensive, and it is almost always hiding something unbearable. Then came the whisper, low at first, barely formed, but enough to change everything. Princess Charlotte had received tragic news. News so personal, so destabilizing, that it had pulled her father out of public life in an instant. Before anyone could confirm what it meant, before any official language could soften the edges, the palace had already closed ranks, and the quiet that followed was louder than any announcement. At precisely 9:07 a.m. London time, Kensington Palace released a statement so brief it bordered on chilling. All scheduled engagements for the Prince of Wales, including 2 high-profile diplomatic receptions and a multinational environmental summit, were postponed until further notice. There was no mention of illness, no reference to security, no suggestion of mourning, just a pause, a void. For veteran correspondents, that omission was everything. Within minutes, speculation detonated across platforms. Had Catherine's condition taken a sudden turn? Was she back in hospital? Had the king's fragile health worsened? Or was something else unfolding behind the gates, something too volatile to name? Inside the palace walls, the response was immediate and severe. External communications were shut down without debate. Phones were collected, secure lines were rerouted, advisors were pulled from their offices into emergency meetings held behind closed doors, voices hushed, faces drawn. Senior aides, many of whom had navigated the death of the Queen, the implosion of the Sussex relationship, and the slow erosion of public trust, later described this moment as uniquely unsettling. One insider would say quietly, it wasn't chaos, it was a calculated silence, and that's what made it terrifying. The public had seen last-minute cancellations before, illness, protocol shifts, security threats, but this was different. There was no visible danger, no ambulance, no medical bulletin, no announcement of loss, and yet Prince William had vanished. Entire travel routes were erased, motorcades turned away, interviews scrubbed from calendars as if they had never existed. The machine that normally never stopped moving had frozen mid-rotation. As the hours passed, familiar theories resurfaced and collided. Catherine's recovery, a possible hospital transfer, a security breach, a press leak involving Harry and Meghan. But none of it aligned with the scale of the response. Nothing in the public domain explained why the heir to the throne would abandon everything without even the courtesy of a placeholder explanation. And then, quietly, the narrative shifted. The first unconfirmed leak did not come from a journalist or a correspondent. It came from a staff member speaking anonymously, the words passed like contraband. According to this source, the cancellations were not about diplomacy or health briefings or statecraft. They were about Princess Charlotte. Something had happened, something personal. Something tragic. The source could not explain what it was, only that it involved her directly. That alone was enough. The focus snapped into place. Journalists recalibrated. Analysts began retracing Charlotte's recent appearances, her school schedule, her medical history, her absences. Was she ill? Had something happened at school? Had she collapsed, fainted, been hospitalized? Then came the detail that stopped even the most hardened correspondents cold. Prince William's last known interaction before disappearing from public view. An aide reported seeing him standing in a private corridor, phone pressed to his ear. The color drained from his face. His hand trembled. He lowered the phone slowly, placed it on the table as if it weighed too much to hold, and whispered, "I need to get to her now." He left everything behind, his car, his staff. His briefcase. He ran. That was the moment insiders understood this was not about the crown. This was about a father. What followed would never be formally acknowledged, but its impact rippled outward, reshaping everything it touched. Princess Charlotte believed it was just another routine day. She wore her uniform. She smiled with practiced ease. She moved through her schedule unaware that something irrevocable had already been set in motion. What she did not know was that she was carrying a secret sealed in an envelope addressed only to her. When she opened it, something inside her fractured. What she read was never meant for the public. But it changed her future and it shattered her father. The envelope arrived without ceremony, no royal crest, no prior notice. Just a soft cream-colored parcel slipped quietly among her school materials, delivered by private courier and bypassing every expected checkpoint. Palace protocol, usually rigid to the point of suffocation, was unusually silent. No assistant had been alerted, no nanny warned. It was addressed solely to her. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The timing was precise. Inside was a letter, handwritten, uneven, urgent. The author was someone Charlotte had heard referenced only in hushed tones, a distant royal relative long removed from the palace's inner circles, exiled not by scandal but by neglect. The opening line carried no preamble, no pleasantries. "You have the right to know what I was never allowed to say." The tone was not angry, not emotional, it was worse than both, calm, reflective. Unflinchingly honest, the kind of truth that settles heavy on the chest, regardless of age or lineage. It spoke of hidden truths, of genetic consequences, of a pattern ignored for generations. It warned of a hereditary condition, unnamed but devastating, allegedly carried through Diana's side of the family, and traced through careful observation of Charlotte's own subtle medical history. Until that moment, Charlotte had thought of herself as ordinary in the ways children are allowed to be, mischievous, sensitive, occasionally dizzy, sometimes overwhelmed by light or noise. Nothing remarkable, nothing alarming, but the letter reframed everything. These were not coincidences, it suggested, they were symptoms, and they would intensify with time. She did not cry. She did not scream. Those who saw her afterwards said her face went pale, as if something essential had been drained away, her posture folded inward. Her steps faltered as she left the private reading room. One aide later described her eyes as blank, like something had been erased. Charlotte excused herself without explanation. Minutes later, she disappeared from view. A message was sent to William, only 7 words: "You need to come now, she's not okay." He did not hesitate, he abandoned protocol, ignored security. Witnesses said he ran through private corridors barefoot, calling her name, fear breaking through his voice before he reached her room. The door was closed, his knock was gentle at first. Then desperate, when it finally opened, the look on his face said more than any statement ever could. What had been revealed in that letter was more than information. It was a warning, a burden. A timeline, one that carried implications not just for Charlotte's future, but for the lineage of the monarchy itself. And this was only the beginning. What Charlotte had discovered did not exist in isolation. It reached backward through bloodlines and forward into futures that had never been questioned until now. The House of Windsor has always guarded its medical history with the same ferocity it reserves for matters of state, but Diana's legacy, long mythologized as emotional and symbolic, may have carried something else entirely. Something physical, something inherited, something dormant, and Charlotte, it seemed, might be its next awakening. It did not take long for whispers to reach the highest levels of the palace's medical advisory circle. Though the contents of the letter were never formally acknowledged, those who were read in described it as unsettlingly precise. It referenced a rare genetic disorder, one that often went undiagnosed for years, sometimes for generations, because its early symptoms were easily dismissed: dizziness, sensory overload, sudden fatigue, periodic disorientation. In public life, these were labeled stress responses, emotional fragility, pressure-induced episodes. In private, they were ignored. Behind the glamour of the late Princess of Wales had been a quiet pattern of unexplained medical concerns. Diana fainted often. She struggled with light sensitivity, with sudden collapses, with moments of complete physical depletion. At the time, the explanations were convenient and incomplete: stress, eating disorders, emotional strain. But palace insiders now believed those were fragments of something deeper, something that medicine at the time either failed to name or was never allowed to investigate. Diana's father, John Spencer, had reportedly suffered from similar episodes, Nerve sensitivity, sudden weakness, unexplained collapses. No diagnosis was ever confirmed. Records from that era were thin. What existed was sealed under private orders, but patterns do not disappear simply because they are hidden. William, perhaps without realizing it, had seen echoes of those patterns in his daughter. When Charlotte was still a toddler, he had raised quiet concerns during routine health checkups. Her occasional dizziness, her aversion to bright lights, moments where she seemed briefly disoriented as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. He was reassured. Growing pains, doctors said. Overstimulation, nothing more, but as she grew older those moments did not fade, they sharpened. And now a letter had drawn a line straight back to his mother. The author of the letter had not written emotionally, she had written methodically. She cited medical literature, family anecdotes. Private notes from Diana's biographers that never made it into public print. She did not claim certainty, she offered probability. And in doing so, she lit a fuse the palace had spent decades trying to bury. Within 24 hours, royal physicians began assembling under conditions of extreme secrecy. Tests were ordered. Specialists were flown in under assumed names. Appointments were scheduled at irregular hours to avoid detection. Nothing appeared on official calendars. No corridors were cleared. But those inside the medical wing knew something extraordinary was unfolding. The urgency was unmistakable. They were searching for something rare, inherited, often dormant until adolescence, and potentially debilitating. What shook William most was not the science, it was the memory. He had watched his mother struggle without answers. He had lived through the chaos that followed when explanations never came. Now history was circling his daughter. He was overheard telling an aide, voice barely steady, "It feels like losing my mother all over again, except this time I can't let it happen." This was not just fear of illness. It was fear of repetition, of secrecy, of a cycle reawakening. And as doctors worked behind closed doors, another storm was already forming, one that threatened to fracture the palace from the inside. As the world speculated, Catherine received the news alone, still recovering, still shielded from public view. The message came in the quiet hours before dawn. William had not yet returned. The palace was unnaturally still. A single envelope was delivered to her bedside, not by a physician or an official, but by a trusted aide whose hands trembled as she lowered her eyes. Catherine did not ask what it was. She nodded, took the envelope, and asked to be left alone. Moments later, the door to her private recovery suite was locked from the inside. What followed was silence, no movement, no requests, until a sharp, decisive command cut through the stillness. "Remove every media device from this room." Phones were taken, screens unplugged. The television went dark. Catherine did not want speculation, she did not want analysis, she did not want the world narrating her daughter's pain, she wanted clarity and control. Aides outside the room described muffled sobs, then the sound of something striking the wall. Others said she repeated the same phrase again and again, almost like a prayer. "She's just a child." This isn't her burden. Catherine had endured relentless scrutiny before, invasive headlines, public judgment, but this was different. This was maternal, instinctive, fierce. Within minutes she bypassed protocol and issued a directive that stunned staff. Charlotte was to be withdrawn from all upcoming appearances. Public, private, ceremonial, no photographs, no uniforms. No staged smiles, the image machine would stop. Her daughter was not a symbol, she was a girl in pain. Then Catherine broke. For the first time since her own health crisis began, she wept openly. Uncontrolled, a staff member later admitted it was the first time she had allowed herself to collapse, not for her own suffering but for her child's. When the tears subsided, resolve took their place. She picked up her secure line and called William. Her message was brief, final. "We need to stop everything, not pause." Stop. William did not ask questions, he did not argue. He hung up and began erasing his life from the calendar. The cancellations were only the beginning. Against firm advice from courtiers, Prince William cancelled diplomatic meetings, postponed royal tour, and cleared his schedule indefinitely. Advisors warned of reputational damage, of diplomatic fallout, of institutional instability. He did not bend. His words to staff were cold and unwavering. "If she goes down, so does everything I stand for." The palace had spent weeks choreographing appearances designed to project stability. But when advisors presented him with the itinerary, William crossed out every engagement. He refused to appear until Charlotte's situation was understood, addressed, and emotionally stabilized. Courtiers pleaded, they warned him of consequences. He answered them with a sentence that silenced the room. You want optics? Picture your future king abandoning his daughter. Print that. Phone calls from foreign offices poured in. Confusion turned to concern. Government liaisons spoke of broken commitments. William held the line. If anyone uses my daughter's pain for damage control, he reportedly said, I will walk away. Titles included. Inside the family, the divide widened. Some accused him of endangering the institution. Others defended him as overdue. William did not seek consensus. He wrote directly to his father, I am not just a prince, I am a father first. If Charlotte is fighting, I fight with her, everything else can wait. And as those words settled, the monarchy crossed a threshold it could not uncross. Yet even as duty fractured, a quieter tragedy unfolded, one that belonged solely to Charlotte. Her dreams had been vivid and ordinary, ballet recitals, science fairs. Olympic fantasies whispered at night. For months she had been preparing for a royal ballet showcase. She trained relentlessly, practiced late into the evening. Catherine often watched silently from the doorway. It was never about attention, it was about joy. Doctors ended that dream in a single conversation, extended rest, strict regulation. No strenuous activity, no recital, not for months, possibly years. Her curriculum was paused, her training halted, a future carefully mapped vanished. One night Charlotte asked a question so small it broke everyone who heard it. Does this mean I can't be queen one day? William took her hand, his voice cracked. You will always be more than a title. Days later, she quietly gave away her pointe shoes to a younger cousin. No ceremony, no announcement, just surrender. But her pain did not remain contained. There was one silence louder than all others. From the throne, King Charles did not come. There was no call, no note, no visit. Camilla was photographed smiling at a charity luncheon hours after Charlotte's withdrawal became public. When asked if she had reached out, she reportedly shrugged. Children get sick. That's life. The backlash was immediate. Inside the palace, William was furious. Catherine barred Camilla from visiting Charlotte. Charles, briefed on the situation, allegedly replied, William has it under control. Let's stay on schedule. If this were George, William said quietly to an aide, they'd be here already. That silence would change everything. And then Charlotte made a decision no one expected. Charlotte was only a child, but the weight she carried had begun to reshape the ground beneath the palace itself. In the days that followed the silence from the throne, something shifted inside her. While advisors debated optics and courtiers whispered about damage control, she sat quietly with a blank sheet of paper and made a decision that stunned even her parents. She asked for her words to be released, not filtered, not rewritten, hers. It was not suggested by staff, it was not part of any communications strategy, it came from Charlotte alone, calm, certain. She said she wanted other girls to understand. When asked what she meant, she answered simply, girls like me. The letter was handwritten, uneven, earnest. Addressed not to the nation, not to subjects or citizens, but to all the girls like me. 6 words that collapsed the distance between palace walls and ordinary bedrooms across the world. From the first line, it was clear this was not about royalty. It was about identity, about fear, about the quiet panic of realizing your body may not follow the future you imagined. She wrote about being scared of not being strong enough, about feeling lonely even when surrounded by people, about watching dreams dissolve without explanation. She did not dramatize her pain. She named it, and beneath it ran something steadier. Resolve. She wrote that strength is not always standing tall. Sometimes it is knowing when to rest. That bravery can mean stepping away. One line leaked before the palace could react. Even princesses have to pause sometimes. It spread faster than any royal announcement in years, not as a headline but as a truth. Messages poured in from parents, children, teachers, nurses. Mental health advocates rallied around her words. For once, a royal child was not being protected by silence or reshaped by polish. She was being heard. The letter ended with a promise. I'll be back when I'm stronger, promise. It was both farewell and vow, and in those words the nation found something it had been missing. Hope. Inside the palace, the impact was seismic. Advisors who had dismissed Charlotte's condition as private now faced her public truth. The institution was forced to confront a question it had avoided for generations. What happens when a royal child chooses honesty over endurance? The ripples spread quickly. With Charlotte's future uncertain, succession conversations shifted. William began asking questions no heir had ever voiced. What if they don't want it? What if they deserve a choice? Discreet meetings followed, hypothetical in name only. Reform-minded advisors listened as William spoke about pressure, inheritance, emotional cost. About designing a monarchy that protected its children instead of consuming them. George's role changed almost overnight. Longer briefings, deeper visibility, a subtle but unmistakable pivot. Catherine, quiet but resolute, supported a new narrative. Wellness, consent, flexibility, a monarchy that could bend without breaking. For William, the crown no longer felt inevitable. It felt conditional. Watching Charlotte find her voice altered him. She showed me what matters, he told a confidant. Not how we look, but how we protect each other when no one is watching. The palace still stands, the titles remain, the ceremonies continue, but beneath the gold something fundamental has changed. A father chose love over legacy, a child chose truth over silence. And the monarchy, for the first time in decades, is being forced to imagine a future where the crown is not the heaviest thing its children carry.